And 15 seconds. TJ, queue up. 10. And 5.
Good morning, Your Excellencies. Good morning, colleagues, and good morning, our distinguished panelists, wherever you are watching us from around the world. It's good morning, good afternoon, and a good evening. Today, we have a very interesting conversation about violent extremist groups and illicit economies. And I pray your indulgence that you be patient with us. The interactions, I have been doing a bit of research myself on this particularly interesting topic. The interactions between organized crime and terrorist networks and other violent groups are often about resources, no doubt about that. In some cases, in fact, transactional relationships are established, almost always on a temporary basis, when the criminals and terrorists see a mutual benefit to be derived from such collaboration. Some terrorist networks attempt to forge alliances of convenience with criminal groups for profit, access to illicit logistical chains, or for the sake of joining forces against a common enemy, which most often is the state. In other cases, an adversarial relationship exists between organized crime and terrorist networks. Here, the presence of illicit economies may attract terrorists into a particular location where they offer themselves as protectors of the population against the deficiencies of the state and the predatory behavior of criminal groups. And in return, they accept to receive local support for their group. Of course, both organized crime and terror networks are just some of the many violent non-state and state actors who are pursuing access to and control over resources and population. So this morning, we have a very interesting conversation, which has been going on for some time now. And we have very interesting panelists to explain to us the relationship, the nexus between violent extremist groups and illicit economies in West Africa. So it is my pleasure to call upon Dr. Onyinye Onuwaka. He is the acting director of the Directorate of Early Warning Office of the VP ECOWAS Commission. She has a PhD in history and international studies from Imo State University, and a diploma in peace and security, Department of Peace and Conflict Research from Uppsala University in Sweden. She is one of the facilitators of the Regional Integrated Analysis module at the United Nations Staff College. She was an instructor and advisory fellow at Auschwitz Institute for Peace and Reconciliation for the Prevention of Genocide. She is also a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Mediators and Counselors. She was a lead facilitator at the International Training on Demobilization, Disarmament, and Reintegration course, the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Center, Ghana, and a consultant for the development of the curriculum for the Facilitators Conflict Prevention Manual of the International Peace Support Training Center in Kenya. It is my pleasure to call upon Dr. Onyinye Onuwaka, Acting Director of Early Warning Office of the VP ECOWAS Commission, to give an opening remark.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on which part of the world you're located. Feyi, at some point, I was wondering who you were introducing. And I realized that perhaps it was me, but thank you for those kind words. I don't know where that was lifted from, but I really appreciate that you continue to associate ECOWAS with this conversation. So dear friend and colleague, Dr. Feyi, let me also recognize the presence of the European Union. I hope here present on the call. The panelists, my own sister and colleague, Nanteni Coulibaly, um, Miss or Mr. Berger, I'm not sure the gender, and then Dr. Aziz, the researcher, and my brother and also a friend, Dr. Ndubisi Annie, and the rest of the colleagues who have joined us on this very pertinent and interesting conversation, reminding us of the existential threat that we all face, terrorism, in our region, and how it is linked closely with illicit economies. And I think this is quite germane because when you look across our region, every information that is out there is linked to either violent extremist groups or illicit economies in West Africa. Therefore, it is important that we begin to condense this conversation to see the linkages between this extremist group and illicit economies in our region. It is therefore my pleasure to welcome you to this very important workshop on the role of violent extremist groups in illicit economies in West Africa. The fragile governance and democratic processes in many ECOWAS member states, coupled with weighty related issues such as endemic corruption, has contributed to an established complex phenomenon, increase in organized crime and related activities. This includes illicit drug trafficking, human and firearms illicit trade, money laundering, and to a large extent, maritime piracy, terrorism, and violent extremism. In this context, distinguished audience, a combination of these factors has shown that it threatens political, economic, and social development in our region. In addition, these crimes foster violence, undermine the rule of law, good governance, and democratic processes in our region, thereby putting at risk the prospect of sustained economic growth and poverty reduction efforts made at national and also regional level. Distinguished audience, sadly, the 2024 Global Terrorist Index shows that the Central Sahel region hosts the most deadliest terrorist groups in the world and has become the epicenter of global terrorism. The Sahel region accounts for about half of all death-related terrorist attacks, with Burkina Faso, Mali, Nigeria, Niger suffering most of the casualties. The steady growth and expansion of violent extremism in the ECOWAS region is of particular concern to the ECOWAS Commission as a whole. In Niger, Mali, Burkina, violent extremism has not only led to a humanitarian catastrophe, but is also linked to the spats of coups d'etats that people have said the resurgence of the coup d'etat regime, which further destabilizes national and regional stability. Of more worrying concern is that violent extremist groups have expanded their areas of operation beyond the Sahel, reaching to the coastal states of the West African region. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the glaring sustainability synergies of violent extremism is that these groups are increasingly co-located, co-created with illicit economies, which play a pivotal role in providing them with operational resources, finances, and legitimacy. Throughout the Sahel region, extremists control and manage highly lucrative illicit economies, including unlicensed gold mining, timber logging, while imposing zakat, which you all know is tax, in communities in areas of their operation. Kidnapping also serves as a major source of income, as well as an infiltration and intimidation strategy in our local communities. Ladies and gentlemen, violent extremism further aggravates perennial crisis situations like the farmer-herder conflicts and intercommunal clashes. Aggrieved groups and individuals are increasingly collaborating, sadly, with terrorist groups and extremist groups to undertake these operations. Ladies and gentlemen, the extremist threats in West Africa requires more concerted efforts beyond what we have seen the few directly affected countries who are grappling with this challenge, and of course with the regional support. We must therefore collectively address the fundamental and foundation causes of violent extremism, such as climate change and states' inability to provide public goods and good governance. This includes implementing socioeconomic policies that tackle poverty, unemployment, youth bulge, developmental challenges, especially in remote border communities and ungoverned spaces. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the Early Warning Directorate is consistently monitoring and analyzing the evolving dynamics and providing policy advice to decision makers to spur informed response. This includes working with key stakeholders to address the terror threat in our region. As you know, the early warning of the ECOWAS is one of the most celebrated early warning architecture globally. And we have our indicators. Key among them is crime and criminality and terrorism, including security issues. And we are trying on daily basis to keep track of what is going on in our member states at the local, subnational, and also the regional level. My sincere appreciation goes to the Institute for Security Studies and the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime for the fruitful collaboration they've had so far, you have had with the ECOWAS Commission over the years, mainly on the framework of the recently concluded implementation of the OQUAT project. Congratulations to this excellent team. This seminar is evidence of the partnership between the ECOWAS Commission and civil society to better understand the threats in the West African region. Very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, dear moderator, it is my wish that this seminar would further unpack, explore ways, practical ways to enhance the resilience of our member states to push back the threat of violent extremism and organized crime threats. I wish you all very fruitful deliberation, and I look forward to the conclusion of this key activity, which I think would help to advance our collective effort to address this threat that puts on our faces, that disturbs our development efforts and retards the growth that we all hope to achieve. I thank you so much for having us, and I hope that my colleague Nantini would continue to sit in for the rest of the day. Thank you, Feyi, and enjoy the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Onyinye. That was wonderful. Our boss just said just sent a note that this was a perfect opening remark. And when you look as West Africans, when you look what is happening in the region, sometimes as a West African, I ask myself, what can we as a group of people do? What can we as governments do and as community do to resolve? And this kind of interactions, particularly when we're talking about violent extremist organization and illicit economies, these type of interactions are particularly prominent in West Africa. And as you rightly said, West Africa seems to be the hotspot where robust illicit economies infused by globalization and other factors have contributed to a substantial increase in trafficking activities, which you mentioned. In turn, this illicit economic activity compounds and intensifies a host of problems as corruption, predatory behavior of political elites, political instability, weakening of law enforcement and rule of law, and so forth. And you actually named them, including coup d'etat. So it is my pleasure to thank you very, very much for this very wonderful opening remark. And we wish you the pleasant rest of the day activity. Thank you very much, Dr. Onyinye. Your Excellencies, we have the next speaker, who is Professor Leila Ben Amo Matthew. She is the head of the Human Development section of the EU delegation. And interestingly, no one knows better about illicit economies and violent extremist organization, probably more than her. Your Excellency, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this seminar, particularly given that she was in Mali. So she has all the experiences, all the data to give us an informed opening remark. It is my pleasure to welcome Professor Leila Ben Amo Matthew, the head of the Human Development section of the EU delegation. You have the floor, please.
Thank you so much. I'll just switch on my camera very briefly so that you can all of you see me. I'm here standing for my ambassador, Samuela Isopi, who is currently chairing a meeting with all EU member states ambassadors. So I just switched back my camera. I also, yes, I will just switch it up now. Okay, so thank you very much again. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be here with you today. It's true that I've had a long-standing interest in the ECOWAS region and its stability. However, I'm here to speak on behalf of both the ambassador, Samuel Isopi, and our head of cooperation to Nigerian ECOWAS, Massimo De Luca. It is therefore on their behalf that I welcome you and us to this webinar on the role of violent extremist organizations in illicit economies in West Africa. As the lady representing the acting director representing the ECOWAS Commission made clear already, the growth of violent extremist organizations in the Sahel and in the wider West African region is of critical concern to all of us. It is very important, therefore, to understand the strategies used by these violent extremist organizations and, in particular, understand what is driving their success and expansion, despite numerous counter-insurgency efforts driven by national, regional, and international bodies. It is crucial to recognize the role that illicit economies play in the armed group strategies, not only for financing or as operational resources, but also to build legitimacy within communities. The research that is going to be presented today reminds us of a very important point. The relationship between instability and crime is not that straightforward. In some cases, even, illicit economies can have a stabilizing impact in communities and therefore increase the community resilience. This is something we must better understand. It is urgent to better understand. Therefore, our understanding, of course, needs to be nuanced and evidence-based in order to design crime-sensitive stabilization efforts that do not constrain people's sources of resilience and their livelihoods. Ladies and gentlemen, the research conducted by the Institute for Security Studies and the Global Initiative for Transnational Organized Crime focus on regions where violent extremist groups are active but not yet fully entrenched, namely southern Mali and northern Benin. However, it is very important to take the right action now to minimize the expansion and infiltration of these groups into local communities. The relationship between authorities and communities needs to be strengthened so that armed groups are not perceived by communities as legitimate alternative security and governance providers. Authorities need to increase their presence in these regions, not only to provide security, but also to be the key provider of infrastructure, social services, livelihood, social justice. Moreover, trust building between the authorities and communities should be a core aspect of any security operation. Engaging in dialogue with local communities by security actors during patrols, for example, help foster confidence in the security sector's commitment to protecting villages against violent extremist groups. Promoting confidence-building initiatives between communities is also important so that armed groups are enabled to push their narrative successfully as they seek to capitalize on community tensions to infiltrate local populations. Farmer and urban communities are particularly vulnerable to this phenomenon in the entire region. Ladies and gentlemen, the EU delegation to Nigeria and ECOWAS is proud to support and be part of this effort to better understand and analyze drivers of violent extremism through the lens of illicit economies. We are grateful for the evidence-based research produced over the years by our partners, the Institute for Security Studies and the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. Through our regional program, the Organized Crime West Africa Response to Trafficking, or ORT, which concluded late last year, and particularly under the Enhancing Africa's Response to Organized Crime Project, ENACT. All my warm thanks also, as always, to the ECOWAS Commission for their collaboration and support in this project. I thank you all, and I wish us all an excellent workshop. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Leila Ben Matthew. That was well said. I mean, if you're staying within the conversation, within the panel, I will have a question for you later on. You said something about the farmer herder community, especially becoming vulnerable, but we must move on. But if you're staying, later on, probably I will pose a question to you, particularly with your experiences from Mali. So, Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, and all others who are looking, let's give a big hand to Professor Leila Ben Matthew, wherever we are. Thanks a lot. Now we are moving to another section of the program, which is a panel discussion. And on that panel discussion, we have 4 panelists. We have Nancy Coulibaly, Senior Analyst, Crime and Criminality at the Early Warning Directorate of ECOWAS Commission. We have Flora Baja, Senior Analyst at the GI Talk. We have Dr. Mbusi Christian Ani, also Senior Researcher and Project Coordinator of ENACT and ISS. And of course, Dr. Aziz Morsi, Researcher, University of Paracoa and Lasdell in Benin. So those are our 4 panelists. And I hope we're all prepared to give our presentation. So right now, I'm going to call on Nantini Coulibaly, who is a Senior Analyst, Crime and Criminality at the Early Warning Directorate of ECOWAS. Nantini is a Senegalese, and she did her secondary studies at the Lycée John F. Kennedy in Dakar to the level of baccalaureate. She also attended the University of Sheikh Anta Diop, where she got a master's degree and an MPhil at the Faculty of Arts and Human Sciences. So living in that region in Senegal, where most of us live, just next door to Mali, she also knows quite a thing or two about violent extremist organization and illicit economies. She's been with the ECOWAS Commission for a very long time, particularly Early Warning Directorate. So it's my pleasure to call upon Nantini Coulibaly, Senior Analyst, Crime and Criminality, the Early Warning Director of ECOWAS, to give her presentation. Natalia, are you there? Can you hear us? I think probably Nancy is having challenges with the sound because I can't hear. Christian, can you hear her?
No, yeah. So maybe it's just the sound from the machine.
Maybe, is it possible we move on to the next speaker whilst she's sorting it out and we'll come back to her?
Okay, I think I am next
Accident.
on the list. So if Nantene is still trying to figure her sound out, maybe I'll just go ahead then. All right, so thank you everyone. Thank you to the ECOWAS and AU representative for being with us and giving these opening remarks. And of course, thank you to all the panelists and participants for being here with us today. So I'm Flore Berger, a senior analyst at the West Africa Observatory of illicit economies of GTOC, Global Initiative. So I just wanted to take 5 minutes here to give you some context on violent extremist organizations' engagement with illicit economies. Because when we think about relationship between VEOs, so violent extremist organizations, and illicit economies, for a long time, that relationship has been only or mostly seen through the lens of the crime-terror nexus, meaning armed groups leveraging financing through illicit economies. In the Sahel in particular, in northern Mali, a lot of focus revolved around what was called narco-jihad, that basically meaning Al-Qaeda engagement in the drug trafficking. But what we have been doing in the past years in this program in partnership with ISS is showing through our research that the relationship between crime and violent extremism is much more nuanced and complex than a purely financial driven one. So we actually have come with a framework. So we have basically 3 main lenses through which armed groups' involvement in illicit economies should be analyzed. And I just want to take a minute to talk about each of them separately. So the three lenses are financing, resourcing, and legitimacy. So with financing, again, as I just said, this is maybe the most known one, I don't know, the one that maybe makes the more sense. And it is that armed groups obviously need money to finance their operations, to recruit new members, and to step up the logistics when they want to expand, which they have been doing, as we all know. And so, for example, a very clear example of that is in the early 2000s, when Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb was still in southern Algeria, northern Mali. Their main source of revenue came from kidnapping Westerners and negotiating high ransoms in exchange of their freedom. So we know that, well, we estimate that they, between 2008 and 2013, made about a bit more than $90 million from kidnapping Westerners. And that money definitely allowed them to finance themselves and move further into northern Mali and then spread and etc. So it was really a key source of financing that allowed them to expand and be successful. And by the way, you'll see with Aziz's presentation, but the kidnapping industry has drastically changed now, and the primary motivation is not anymore, if at all, financial. But that was back in the day is a very clear example of financing. The second lens, as I said, is resourcing. That's a very interesting one, also a bit overlooked, or at least less understood, I think. So that's basically, in addition to money, to cash, armed groups also need vehicles, fuel for these vehicles, food, etc., to make their operation running. And that needs become, of course, more and more important the more they spread and expand in new geographies. So even if they had a lot of money, but they cannot get their hands on, let's say, motorbikes, because of the lack of supply chain in an area, that would be obviously problematic. And if we continue with motorbike example, because it's actually critical in armed groups' mobility, and mobility being one of the key strengths of these groups, because motorbikes are constant presence in the armed groups' operation on the battlefield, but also for their daily conduct. So because armed groups, and in particular JNIM, so the most active group in the Sahel today, because they buy so much trafficked motorbikes, because the group has such a substantial role as buyers of trafficked motorbikes, they end up creating their own supply chains to make sure that there's never a shortage of motorbikes, which would be really detrimental to their operations. So that's the resource, operational resources lens. So as I said, motorbikes, but it can also be fuel, it can also be cars, etc. And then a quick, the last lens, a very important one, is the legitimacy. So that's the third and last one. I think in our research, we have focused a lot on that because it's absolutely key to take into account not only to understand and be able to nuance the relationship between illicit economies and armed groups, but also to design crime-sensitive policies as part of broader stabilization programs. So this ties into the understanding of the armed group's decision to engage or not in illicit economies and the nature of their engagement. So if we take JNIM, again, the most active group, and also the group that is the focus of today's presentation by Christian and Aziz, JNIM has won the acceptance and support of many communities across the region by facilitating access to illicit activities or by opening up illicit activities to new demographics. So the obvious examples here are artisanal gold mining and also activities around national parks, so poaching or timber logging. So while authorities have been restricting more and more access to artisanal gold mines or banning the activity altogether, like in Burkina Faso, for example, JNIM, in a strategic move, opened that restricted space to communities. They have, for example, provided security around gold mines so that the activity can run well and the miners can get income from it, as you know, as main source of livelihoods. Gold is a main source of livelihood for many communities. And so this has really been key for JNIM long-term presence in given areas. Basically, that allows JNIM to not only come and go in communities, but to really entrench itself in the communities, which then allows the group to go further in new geographies. And that we believe, like, understanding that JNIM is not just driven by financial needs, it's not just the financing that is driving the group's decision, it's actually also its governance goals. Is very important for counterinsurgency strategies and stabilization strategies. So yeah, that concludes my overview with those three lenses: financing, resourcing, and legitimacy. And hopefully it becomes also a bit more concrete with Christian and Aziz's presentation that focuses on specific case studies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Flora Berger. I did not introduce you properly to our audience and for those who are joining in. Flora is the senior analyst at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. She's been with them for the past 4 years, and she specializes in conflict dynamics in the Sahel and focusing on non-state armed groups and governance. I think prior to her joining GI Talk, she was an independent consultant working for a variety of stakeholders in Europe and in Mali. She's also worked for the IISS in London as a Sahel analyst and a crisis group on the Great Lakes region. So she's an expert on some of the issues we are talking about. So thank you very much, and we look forward to you coming back and asking questions and taking on some questions from our online audience. I think we can go back to Nante, who was was having some technical difficulties. Nante, if you can hear me, you have the floor, please.
Yes, I hope you can hear me too.
Yes, I can hear you this time. Yes.
Hello.
Please. Hello, Nante.
Oh, I'm glad.
Nante, yes, I can hear you. Sometimes it happens.
Yes. Yes, please allow me to share my screen. I hope it works this time around. I hope you're seeing it.
Yes, we are seeing you. Well, I can see you.
And you. Okay, I hope you're seeing my screen too, because I want to present the data to you.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Feyi. Thank you to ISS for the invitation. I think my director had set the stage for me to follow with the data that we have here at our disposal in ECOWAS. But before presenting it to you, I would like to greet the whole audience and experts present on this panel, very important panel today. My short presentation will go around three points. The first one is, of course, to give human, of course, from me is the project we are discussing. And this will be the second point before we look at some interventions that could help mitigate the impact of VE, violent extremism, being used, rather violent extremism using illicit business to fund, its operations and expand its territories. The first thing I would like to say is that looking at the ECOWAS data, we see, which is based on human security in the region. We could see how, the incidents are being dispatched across the. We could see clearly major hotspots of human security incidents and events that occurred in 2022 and also in 2023. The data is speaking. It's clear that where we have more vulnerabilities, where we have more human security issues, one of those hotspots is the Liptako-Goma. We also had the northwestern Nigeria that followed the northeastern Nigeria, and we see how it is going downwards, right? This is overall the ECOWAS human security indicators that allow us to map out this incident in 2022, in 2023. When we focus on security only, the temperature is the following. If we look at the map, with the heat map generated by ECOWAS, we could see the same hotspots, which are the concentrations in terms of incidents related to human security, and specifically also security-related incident. I should explain something. ECOWAS human security is clustered into 5 thematic. One of them is governance and human rights. The second one is security. Security encompasses whatever has to do with violent extremism, terrorism, and maritime security. The third one is crime and criminality, which has 3 sub-pillars. The one being gender and sexual violence, the second one personal safety, and the third one transnational organized crime. We also have a 4th thematic, which is on environment. So food security, land tenure, transhumance issues, farmer-herder conflict, and also climate change are being monitored under that thematic. And the last one is health. Not only epidemics and pandemics are being monitored, but we also monitor health infrastructures in the region. No one can say today that health does not matter when it comes to human security, because we saw what Ebola has done. We also have seen what the pandemic, COVID-19, has done to the region and to the world. So if we look at this security mapping, this heat map was generated based on the 14 indicators we monitor. And out of those 14, only one is on, maritime security. All the 13 one are on security, terrorism, and violent extremism. And the mapping of this, incident shows clear alliances of course, between criminal and terror groups across borders. We have been getting reports showing that groups are crossing in those hotspots that we have highlighted earlier, and which shows, of course, the widespread existence of violent extremist groups and illicit activities. We all know also that the Sahel is a historic trade routes across countries, both in the Maghreb and also in the sub-Saharan Africa. We have, when it comes to hotspots, we saw them on the map here from the frontline countries, Mali, Burkina, Niger, and Nigeria. We saw gradually Benin Republic and Togo being added to the major hotspots when it comes to these activities. And major criminal activities, I think Flo have started mentioning some of them. We had those in the opening remarks of our two ambassadors, I mean the director and the Madam Leila from EU, and then of course kidnapping with or without ransom, illegal mining, illegal logging, fuel smuggling, poaching, drug trade, trafficking in persons, gangs operations we called banditry here in Nigeria, including rackets, cattle rustling, and so on. So the list is long, but the major ones that we map out from data that we have on ECOWAS include these ones that I have just listed. And when we look at those countries that are being targeted, being Northern Benin and also Southern Mali, of course, we know the presence of JNIM. We know also the presence of IS, Islamic State Sahel. We also know when it comes to Nigeria about the ISWAP and also Boko Haram, and increasingly non-state armed groups, led by some, led by Fulanis and also others led by Hausa people. From the report that we get, Bello Turji is one of those, leaders when it comes to non-state actor groups, very popular here in Nigeria. And just to conclude on this security situation, which gives the global picture when it comes to security temperature of the region, the first quarter of 2024, which is the latest 2024, the latest data that I could share with you because we generated that quarterly map in April 2024, shows that 1,878 security-related events occurred in ECOWAS member states, with 5,492 deaths. This is what ECOWAS has as a data. And if we look at the data closely, armed attacks, including those perpetrated by the groups we are considering in this panel, accounted 77.65%. Now, this is what was asked to me, the regional implications. We that these groups have been getting more weight, more power. If you look at the data, violent events, involving extremist groups has at least doubled every year since 2015. And the governance sector, I think the acting director mentioned it in her opening remarks. We saw the resurgence of coup, right, in the region, which were driven by the inability, let me put it in quote, the inability to contain the jihadist insurgency in the Central Sahel. So this was the argument, given to, let's say, to justify why a coup was being perpetrated in one member state or the other. And then we saw also, as an implication, increased threat to social cohesion. I'm not saying that in other sectors, those groups are kind of regarded as those helping social cohesion. We can come back to that because we know that some of them are celebrating, weddings for people. They are celebrating baptism. They are funding weddings where, for instance, men cannot, give the dowry. They are the ones supporting. Some reports exist, but globally, what we see from our data is that there's increased threat to social cohesion because of the amplification of grievances and intercommunal differences, as a means of mobilizing and fostering anti-government sentiments in mainly those marginalized, communities. Infiltration and building support through weapon supply And then this is, of course, to escalate mainly local farmer herder disputes and illicit business. Of course, when we talk about this, we see the worsening in illicit trade of arms across border, and also drugs, mainly trauma, other opioids being being used by those non-state armed groups and other commodities. I was referring to fuel here because from the report that we got, the fuel price from Bamako to Aguelhot changes a lot. When it is, below 1,000 in Bamako, in around Aguelhot, it could reach 4,000 francs CFA 1 liter. So scarcity of those commodities. So the business, is really something that flourishes because it's lucrative. Now, the widespread of gangs operations. I spoke about the banditry, with homicides being, one of the most reported, incidents in the region, and also pervasive kidnapping, targeting diverse demographics in a country like Nigeria, but also the Central Sahel and Northern Benin, as the data has shown. And also another implication is the impact on welfare and livelihood. I spoke about the fuel earlier, but food commodities, non-access to those commodities, non-access also, the surge in food prices, etc. So this is a big concern. And then environmental implications. We will get surely more information about mining, illicit logging, in hotspots that are, under our consideration today. But what I can say is that, for instance, timber logging, we all know that how severely it is triggering biodiversity loss, deforestation and temperature change, and also the health implications when it comes to illegal mining, right? Which also has an impact on water contamination, ingestion of harmful chemicals is also another consequence. Intimidation and aggression, one of the typical violent extremism indicators that we have in ECOWAS. Of course, all very rampant. Poachers, hunters, fishers, and so on, and many other people within local communities being persistently forced, to collaborate with those violent extremist groups in fear of revolt. So you collaborate with us, you are protected, you help us do the business, you help us attack, you help us, etc., perpetrate our expansion to get more territories, or okay, you see what will happen. Continuous expansion of gray areas. Continuous expansion of gray areas. The data is very clear. I will now go to what the data says about this continuous expansion of gray areas, spill over to coastal countries. If we look at this, we saw, for instance, from this ACLED data, that between 2018 and 2020, there was a total of 3,728 terrorists that were recorded in the region. And we had only 4, 2 in Benin Republic and 2 in Cote d'Ivoire. But if we extend the data to 2023, meaning from 2018 to 2023, the 3,700 has reached the number of 13,512 terrorist incidents that took place in the region. And 5% of this incident occurred in coastal countries. Benin, that had 2, has recorded 289 incidents. The kidnappings, many other incidents that occur in the north. And then we have also Togo with 33 and Cote d'Ivoire 16. Mention is done on Cote d'Ivoire on the fact that the last event in Cote d'Ivoire was recorded in January 2022. So it's very clear from the data that it is expanding from the Central Sahel down to the coastal areas. And in some countries, we heard about some move made by governments to counter, right? So maybe in the discussion, we can come back to that. But as we said earlier, when we talk about the major implications of what is happening in those hotspots of violent extremism, illicit business being used, right, to expand territories and fund operations, we think of humanitarian impact. We think of humanitarian implications. And when we take, for instance, the education in emergency this is OCHA data speaking here. The Sahel, comprises 18.7 million out of school children. Very alarming figure. And 8% of this represent 8% of the 2,236,000 out of school in the world. And of course, when we talk about these out of school children, we think of girls, children with disabilities, children mainly in conflict affected areas being the most affected ones. If we look at the data in 2022, 2023, the number of closed school, which gives a temperature of how bad the situation is in those gray areas, it has increased by 66%. And in 2023, had 8,300 targeted schools shut down in the Central Sahel. We are talking of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. So in 2023, Mali, almost all regions of Mali have been impacted by attacks perpetrated by non-state actors, non-state groups, rather, non-state armed groups. And in Mali, we are talking of 20% of those schools being still closed, right? Because they are threatened by armed groups, mainly JNIM, and this is the main reason, of course, of the closure. And today, what we see in Mali is also very, very alarming. If you look at Burkina Faso, which is severely hit, 1 school out of 4 is targeted, is closed. So a total of 6,149 schools were shut down as at November 2023, and almost 1 million out of school children in Burkina Faso alone, right? And it is important to know that for humanitarian purpose, 230 schools are currently being used as temporary shelter for IDPs within the country. Still talking about regional implications, and this is the last temperature I will give on humanitarian, and it's about food security after talking about education. The analysis of the harmonized framework shows that, 29.5 million people are in crisis phase or worse, which are phase 3 to 5. 1 million are in emergency phase, which is phase 4. Of course, Nigeria, with its demographic, has also the highest number in terms of people affected by this different phase, of food security. And today we have 22,480 people living in the Sahel region of Burkina Faso who are in catastrophe situation. So out of the 5.4 million people affected by food security in 2023, these are the figures that we have. All the rest are in phase 1 and phase 2. What is quite sad, and we should highlight it, was that the humanitarian response plan was estimated at 751 million. Only 21% of that money was funded to support people affected. The need for education amounted 96.2 million, only 5.4 million. 5.4% rather of these financial requests were covered as at December 2023. A lot needs to be done. A lot needs to be done. And this is the repercussion. This is the consequences. These are the consequences of whatever is happening in those areas where those non-state armed groups are, or terror groups are perpetrating their activities. Areas of a lot. I would like to just, because I got the data that I showed on humanitarian from our directorate in charge of humanitarian and social affairs, to give you more specific, figures and precise figures on how it is impacting on people in West Africa. The directorate in charge of humanitarian and social affairs includes the mandate of the directorate includes anticipatory action to proactively mitigate humanitarian impacts before they unfold. And this action is to prevent the hotspots of the affected countries from becoming the hub for recruitment and radicalization. This is early warning. What I think could be done is, as an early warner, the first thing is to respond to early warnings. Our job on a day-to-day basis is to assess vulnerabilities, is to assess risk on member states, is to map out hotspots of human insecurity, to show trends of humanity sector by sector. But are they listening to us? That's why I put the focus on the need to respond to early warnings. Our job is also to examine and explain the root causes of radicalization and violent extremism at the micro, individual level, at the meso, community level, at the macro level, national level, right? Including the pull and the push factors. Why are they joining those groups? What is happening? So for me, ignoring spiking communal violence as a future indicator for GI's expansion could mean that, of course, by the time the government realizes that there's something to do, it's already too late. Because we all know that those groups are strategic in their approach, of exploiting societal and structural vulnerabilities. And especially when the contract between the national government and communities is weak. We also know that those groups capitalize on poverty and unemployment, the absence of basic services, and local community perception. This is very important, the perception of social and political marginalization. We are here in remote places, we don't count. We are not seen, we don't exist for government. And of course, they provide the minimal and tangible services. And by doing that, they replace the state. So state absence is one of the major problems that need to be handled. Absence, the presence is needed not only in terms of military presence for security, is also needed in terms of provisions of services. And I think we think that to counter violent extremism in the short term, efforts should focus on civil-military engagement. We are seeing another militarization of, the tackling of this problem, over-militarization. Early warning says, yes, it's fine to counter because it's urgent to defend, to protect, to neutralize those groups, but it is also very important in the medium and long term to invest in human security, tackle economic and social development projects that could mitigate the root causes of insurgencies. I hope it wasn't too long. That's what I wanted to share with you, and I thank you.
Okay. I was just going to ask you whether you are going to wrap up. But honestly, I wanted to come in between because the presentation was just slightly long, but I just said, this is so interesting. This is absolutely, it's extraordinary. It's absolutely staggering. And for West Africans, you ask a very important question. Are they listening? And these are some of the questions, well, researchers, we ask ourselves, are they listening? And I can imagine the they means our policy chiefs and our state leaders. And it's interesting. We are talking about $751.1 million. Only 21% has been funded. I mean, I ask myself, what is wrong with us? Really? And then we wonder why we have problems in those areas. I mean, honestly, I'm just, as a West African, as a researcher, some of these figures, some of us who are dealing with the Sahel know them, but I'm sure many of our audiences don't know them. In fact, we've got a chart which says whether these things, probably Christian, that is for you, whether this presentation will be available to the people online. Yeah. So, but these figures are just absolutely staggering. But I love the question, are they listening? Anyway, we could go on and on and on and on till kingdom come. Nantene, as a colleague, said Koulibaly, the Senior Analyst and Crime Criminality, the Early Warning Directorate, we want to give you a big, big thank you for that absolutely tremendous work. And my appreciation, and I'm sure the Christians' appreciation to the ECOWAS and Directorate, please tell them that we appreciate the presentation and we have learned a lot from it. Thank you very much. We now move on to Christian Ani. He is, everybody knows Christian anyway, so he's a senior researcher and project coordinator for ENACT. And so I now call, it's my pleasure to call on my colleague, Dr. Mbuisi Christian Ani of the ISS. Christian, please, over to you.
Thank you very much, Feyi. And yeah, so I just want to join you to thank the previous speakers, Madam Nantony, and also Flo, and also for the excellent opening remarks from Dr. Inye and also from Professor Leila. For me, what I will do now is then to, walk off from, the more global West Africa overview that we have had over the last few minutes, to then look at some of the granular kind of issues that are happening on the ground in terms of extremist kind of interaction with civilian populations, particularly in southern Mali. So this kind of gives you a better feel of what happens on the ground, as elaborated very excellently by Madam Nantony. So one of the things we need to, bear in mind in Mali is that, we have seen that steady expansion from the northern part of Mali to the central area of Mali. And then also now the southern part of Mali is now becoming the new frontier. Now the southern part of Mali is the only remaining stronghold of the government. But then now the extremists are now taking advantage and now hoping to expand there, because it's proximate to Bamako, and then also it creates a pathway to neighboring countries. We have Senegal at risk, Guinea at risk, Cote d'Ivoire at risk, even though Cote d'Ivoire has already been attacked severally, and then Burkina Faso, which is already been threatened by this group. So you can see a growing movement from that northern part of Mali, and then extending downwards to the southern areas. And then when we look at data, data shows us that, over the last 3 years, violence within southern Mali has skyrocketed to over 900 when we used to have, let's say, about 100, events between 2017 and 2020. But now we see a more, greater incidence of violence occurring within within the southern region, unlike before. But then there are key factors that contribute to why, and how, and the successes to which these JNIM actors are moving from the northern part of Mali downwards to the southern part of Mali. One of them is the merger. So of the Al-Qaeda affiliates. One thing we need to know is that, yes, Al-Qaeda affiliates, whether we have Ansardine, Hakim, Al-Mori Batun, they all operated individually at the start, But then over time in 2017, with that merger, it means that they now have a more united front, to carry out their operations. So that kind of gave them a huge, a significant boost. And then the second part is also that the Katiba Masina group originated from central Mali. So it kind of gives, the extremist groups a more, underground and local understanding of what is happening on the ground. So when you look at that, you now see that the Katiba Masina also plays a key role in linking the north to the central areas in terms of jihadist operations. And then the third aspect that I would like to share also is the dynamics of the Fema-Header conflict that also plays out in the south and is being exploited by the extremist groups to operate. And something that most of us are also not aware of is the anti-slavery movement, which still occurs within the KS region, and there has been growing agitation, against this group. And, JNIM also takes advantage of this by accepting groups that are willing, to operate within its ranks and to, in some ways, carry out reprisal attacks in communities that are pro slavery. So in some ways, you can see, these factors contribute to how they now extend their reach southwards. Now, looking closely at some of the areas of influence in the southern region of Mali, here what we'll see is that, the JNIM, established a consistent kind of attack around the Baule forest areas, which has 4 forest reserves, and then it's continued to operate within the area. The Baule area, covers areas both within the Kolikoro region and also the Kayes region. And now it even has 2 training camps in that Baule forest area. But yes, and this is something that the government is consistently faced with and has to engage with. You also have several other forests around the area where the jihadists use as areas for covers when they're carrying out their attacks and also infiltration. But then what we see in terms of their involvement, especially in the southern areas, is one, the issue of taxation. Now, our research, in that area shows that communities that are around the Baule forest areas have been forced to, pay zakat to these extremist groups, and they have to pay because in most of the areas around there, there has been no government presence in the past. In fact, in some areas, it's only of recent that they now know that there's a structure known as the police services. So, they have to also contend with that and understand what that dynamics mean. But the jihadis are now taking, advantage of the state absence, as Madam Nantony highlighted, and operating in that area. The second part is the timber logging, but I'll explain this in much more depth later on in the discussion. The other part is cattle rustling and laundering. And what happens here is that cattle from the northern and the central areas that have been rustled from those areas are now taken to the southern regions, and also vice versa. Cattle that have been taken from the southern regions are taken to the northern and southern areas. In some ways, it disguises the origin and makes it okay for them, to still rear the cattle, head them, and sell at a later point. And then you also hear incidences of kidnapping, especially of government officials within the area. And then lastly, there have been reported issues of gold mining, attacks on gold mining operations within the region. So when you see, for instance, that the KS region is, very rich in gold, and most of the gold mining operations occurs within that area, also linking to Senegal, the Kédougou region, you see that the gold mining operations there are significant risk, and this is a lucrative economy that these extremists are hoping to tap into in the long run. Now, when we look at the timber logging specific on its own, so within the Baule forest that it operates, one thing that it did is to dislodge government agents. When you go, reports from the area and also from our field research even shows that some of the forest agents that were working in the area at the time of our field research were murdered, just days after our field research in that area. So you see that a lot of them have moved away from that forest area into major towns in fear for their lives. And what the significant thing that these JNIM actors did was then to loosen restrictions around logging rights. Now they manage logging rights. They don't do the logging themselves. It's good to note that they don't do logging themselves, but then they demand access fees from loggers in order for them to operate. And, you know, when you speak to some of the timber loggers in that area, they tell you that logging, which is a very lucrative activity, is better for them to continue paying those, jihadis than for them to leave it, and then they don't have any livelihood to rely on, to go back to. And secondly, you know, they kind of also opened up areas that were previously restricted by the government. So in all, for them, it is like a plus that, okay, that they're able to operate if they just pay the fees and obey the rules from the jihadist groups. So it's a dynamic that is key for us to understand. And then one other very, very important thing is that bandits had operated in the Bale Forest area for a long time, not only within there, but also in highways, attacking several people. But now what happens is that the loggers will now point to the jihadis and tell them, these are areas where bandits operate. Can you help us clear them out? And the jihadists do that, you know, and clear out bandits. So in many ways, it kind of, as Flo was talking about, creates some legitimization for these groups, that they are responsive to their needs, unlike how the government operated in the past before. Also, it's good to also note that the government is already overstretched with the conflict that is happening both in the north, intense conflict happening in the north and central regions. So now what we hear, the reports that we hear, is that there's excessive logging within those Bale Forest areas. And also one of the severely hit logs or trees in that area is the Koso, that's the rosewood tree within that area. So you see an uptick in that, in the exploitation of Koso trees. You know, there are several stakeholders that are involved in that, but then, you know, there's no clear direct link as to whether they, you know, fund the jihadist groups or not. But then in the areas of operation for timber logging, you know, Koso woods have been exploited in those areas, you know, and has been imported in several numbers to China. So for instance, a figure shows that about 220,000 trees have been, you know, imported to China in the course of less than 3 years. So it's something to ponder about and see, you know, how do we engage international stakeholders to begin to avoid areas that are administered by terror groups. And then there's also the challenge of state-embedded actors, where we see, you know, significant corruption getting into place, you know, that some of these timbers have been logged from areas that are also operated administered by jihadist groups. But then, you know, the origin is not clearly demarcated, pronounced by the government, and they have been shipped not only to China, but then there are other areas such as Mauritania, for instance, where there's also high demand in the logs. So, Feyi, I will conclude with a few set of recommendations. And one of the key ones is, you know, addressing the farmer header crisis. You know, it's important to know that not all the Fulani headers who are operating in the areas are part of, you know, the jihadist groups, even though, you know, in the central region where the jihadists, Katina Masina operated from, you know, came from a Fulani community. But it's very important that they emphasize that they are also at the mercy of these extremist groups, you know. But then because of the conflicts that are arising between farmers and herders, and the suspicion that herders are extremists, or, you know, the conflation of the idea that herders equals extremists, now makes it possible for them to also, some elements to also collaborate, you know, to secure their safety. You also have the issue of the hereditary slavery, where there has to be a national dialogue to stop that practice. I think it's something that is of utmost priority. And then also tackling corruption and engaging stakeholders. But what is more in the long term is ensuring that there is some peace deal, between the Tuareg separatists who have been, involved in clashes with the government since 2011 and 2012, for them to kind of revive a peace deal that gives the government a capacity to maintain security. I think that is of paramount importance and has to be prioritized. So with this, Dr. Feyi, I'll leave it here, and then we'll field question later.
Thank you very much, Christian. That was a wonderful presentation, and we want to thank Dr. Annie for that as well. There are two things many times which I always say, and I'm glad you brought it up, especially the issue of slavery. When you speak to those states, I've been to promotional missions before, whether it's Mali or Mauritania or even Niger. When you speak to the officials of this state, the first thing they say, they deny slavage. They deny it completely. But you're quite right, identifying that issue of hereditary slavery. And the next thing which I'm glad you brought out is that it's important to emphasize that despite some of overall common characteristics of West African countries, their political arrangement, particularly Fulani-Haida relationship, their political arrangements, institutions, patterns of economic development or underdevelopment, if you like, and integration into legal and illegal economies into the political terrain, they're hardly uniform. So sometimes it varies from place to place to place. So thank you very much for bringing that out. And so now it is our call upon the next speaker, who is Abdel Aziz Mosi. Dr. Mosi has a PhD in social anthropology. He's no stranger to some of us. And he's a lecturer and a researcher at the University of Barakou in Benin, and a researcher and laboratory studies and research on social dynamics and local development at Lasdale. He's also the managing director of SOA Africa. His research interest includes the areas of governance of public goods and services, public policy analysis, security governance, and the tensions that may arise around national parks and nature reserves. I'm hoping that when he speaks to us, he will tell us why national parks and nature reserves are such a good place for extremist groups to hide. It is my pleasure to call upon Dr. Abdel Aziz Mosi to give his presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to present in French, if you allow me.
C'est bon.
Alors, bonjour tout le monde et merci pour les intéressantes présentations qui ont précédé la mienne. Je précise que les présentations que je vais faire s'inscrivent donc dans une recherche que nous avons menée avec le JITOC sur les enlèvements dans le nord du Bénin. Et nous avons essentiellement travaillé dans les départements de la Takora et de la Liborie, qui sont concernés par le phénomène d'extrémisme violent, pour voir un peu quels sont les liens entre les enlèvements et les groupes extrémistes violents qui sévissent donc dans le nord du Bénin. Il faut rappeler que les enlèvements au Bénin ne datent pas de la présence des groupes extrémistes violents. Ce sont des événements que les populations connaissent depuis fort longtemps, mais nous avons constaté que la présence des groupes extrémistes violents a, disons, renforcé, a augmenté les cas d'enlèvement qui sévissent donc dans certaines parties du Bénin.
How can we improve our language skill? Hmm?
Alors, disons que, comme je le disais, le Bénin, depuis quelques années, à l'instar de certains pays, donc, de certains pays côtiers, notamment la Côte d'Ivoire, le Togo, a aussi enregistré quelques événements. Depuis 2019, on a enregistré les premiers événements liés à des groupes terroristes. Je rappelle que déjà en 2016, la Côte d'Ivoire avait déjà subi certaines attaques. Mais pour le Bénin, ça date de 2019. On a commencé par enregistrer notamment des enlèvements dans le parc Pendiari, qui est une zone assez complexe et où on a enlevé 2 touristes français. Donc, ça a été le lancement, donc, je dirais, des opérations dans le nord du Bénin. Et entre 2019 et 2020, on a enregistré quelques événements sporadiques ici et là, principalement dans le parc Pendiari, jusqu'en 2021, où on a réellement commencé par enregistrer une fréquence ou une régularité dans les actes terroristes et qui se sont étendus finalement au département de la Liborie qui fait frontière à la fois avec le Burkina Faso, le Niger, mais aussi le Nigeria à travers donc le PAC W. Et durant cette période de 2021 jusqu'à 2022, il a été signalé environ 18 incidents violents qui ont impliqué les organisations extrémistes violents. Mais à partir de 2022, on a vu une croissance presque exponentielle donc de ces événements-là. Ce qui fait donc qu'on a comme l'impression qu'il y a un lien entre cette présence des groupes extrémistes violents et les événements en termes d'incidents qui ont été enregistrés dans ces localités. On a aussi vu que cette présence des groupes extrémistes violents a changé un peu la nature donc des conflits. Autrefois, on enregistrait des conflits essentiellement communautaire, mais avec cette présence-là, on a vu que les violences sont principalement liées à l'extrémisme violent qui ont été donc enregistrés dans ces localités. On voit aussi que les enlèvements ont commencé par être utilisés comme des formes de violence qui sont donc imputées à ces groupes-là et donc auxquels sont exposées les populations. C'est ainsi que, par exemple, en 2022, on a constaté que il y a eu 24 enlèvements qui ont été opérés dans le département de la Tagora, c'est le nord-ouest donc du Bénin, et aussi dans la Liborie qui est au nord-est du Bénin. Et donc, je précise que ces 2 départements sont couverts, le premier par le parc Pendiari et le second par le parc W. Ce qui fait qu'on est passé de 24 à 75 enlèvements qui ont été donc opérés à la fin du mois de novembre 2023. Et plus des 2 tiers de ces enlèvements-là ont été attribués aux organisations extrémistes violentes qui sévissent donc dans cette partie du Bénin. On a aussi vu il y a des points clés ou des points d'entrée de ces groupes extrémistes violents qui sévissent donc dans le nord du Bénin. C'est notamment les zones frontalières à travers donc les 2 départements et principalement dans certaines communes comme Materi, comme Tangueta, comme Malanville ou comme Karimama qui sont potentiellement exposés, qui sont aussi des zones d'infiltration donc de ces groupes-là et parce que c'est des zones qui sont situées à la frontière entre le Bénin et les pays du Sahel, le Burkina Faso et le Niger notamment. Alors, nous avons aussi enregistré qu'il y a principalement 4 types d'enlèvements. Il y a des enlèvements qui sont opérés comme des modèles ou des processus de recrutement forcé. Il y a aussi des enlèvements qui sont opérés en guise de punition de certaines catégories de personnes ou des enlèvements qui sont opérés pour intimider les communautés et des enlèvements qui sont opérés en termes de collecte d'informations ou de renseignements au niveau, donc, auprès des populations sur la position des forces armées béninoises qui se sont installées donc, dans ces régions-là pour combattre le phénomène. Et chacune de ces catégories, chacun de ces types d'enlèvement, bien entendu, répond à des objectifs précis au niveau donc de ces groupes-là qui sévissent donc dans ces zones. Quand on prend par exemple le recrutement forcé, il concerne principalement les jeunes, notamment les jeunes hommes, les hommes de sexe masculin, je veux dire, qui sont ciblés par ce type d'enlèvement-là. Et généralement, c'est des gens qui sont rencontrés de manière fortuite, soit lorsque ces personnes vont au champ ou lorsqu'ils vont disons, à l'approche donc du parc pour chercher peut-être des bois de chauffe ou pour chercher d'autres produits forestiers. Donc, ils rencontrent malheureusement ces groupes extrémistes violents qui les enlèvent de manière fortuite. Et l'objectif, bien entendu, c'est d'obtenir la collaboration avec ces organisations extrémistes violentes, soit en les utilisant en tant que combattants ou en les utilisant comme des fournisseurs ou des prestataires de services au profit donc de ces groupes-là, ce qui leur permet également de maintenir donc la couverture géographique dans cette région-là. Pour ce qui concerne les enlèvements à titre de collecte d'informations, là également, l'objectif, c'est de recueillir des renseignements naturellement sur la présence des forces de l'État, puisque, comme vous le savez, le Bénin a mis en place un dispositif militaire pour quadriller un peu toute la zone frontalière autour du Burkina Faso et du Niger. Et donc, cela ne facilite pas forcément le mouvement de ces groupes-là. Et donc, les populations sont enlevées dans le but donc d'avoir des informations sur la position donc de ces groupes, de ces militaires qui sont positionnés autour donc de ces frontières afin de pouvoir savoir dans quelle zone ils pourraient donc mener les opérations. Mais il y a également des enlèvements, comme je l'ai dit, à titre de punition, qui sont principalement opérés dans une optique de faire donc accepter la présence de ces groupes-là par la population, mais aussi pour exercer une certaine influence et dissuader les populations, surtout de collaborer avec les forces de défense et de sécurité dans la région. Et la quatrième catégorie, le quatrième type d'enlèvement, c'est celui qui concerne donc les intimidations qui sont généralement adressées à des personnalités, je dirais, à des autorités locales, considérées comme des sources d'informations importantes, mais surtout considérées comme des collaborateurs immédiats des forces de défense et de sécurité. Et donc, ces autorités-là sont ciblées principalement à ce titre-là. Il y en a beaucoup qui ont été enlevés. Certains ont été relâchés quelques jours après donc avoir eu les informations recherchées, mais ont été punis, bastonnés, donc maltraités physiquement et puis ont été relâchés quelques jours après. Mais il y en a encore qui sont détenus. Malheureusement, d'autres ont été aussi tués par ces groupes-là, puisqu'il y en a eu qui ont été égorgés quelques jours après donc leur enlèvement. Et ces différents enlèvements, notamment, répondent donc à des stratégies, comme je l'ai dit, de menaces, de soutien forcé donc aux groupes extrémistes violents, mais également pour avoir des informations sur les dispositifs de l'État et aussi faire en sorte que les symboles de l'État ne puissent pas prospérer dans ces localités-là. C'est la raison pour laquelle d'ailleurs des commissariats de police sont attaqués et les populations qui sont considérées comme des populations proches donc des forces de défense et de sécurité sont également enlevées pour dissuader donc la collaboration entre les communautés et les forces de défense et de sécurité. Alors, c'est vrai que tous les enlèvements, comme je le disais, que nous avons identifiés ne sont pas forcément des enlèvements qu'on peut, disons, mettre à l'actif des organisations extrémistes violentes, mais la plupart de ces enlèvements-là sont de leur fait. Mais il y a aussi des enlèvements qui sont opérés à des buts de demande de rançon, même si ce n'est pas forcément la grande partie de ces enlèvements-là. La spécificité donc des organisations extrémistes violentes, en tout cas pour ce qui concerne le nord du Bénin, c'est que dans la plupart des cas, ces enlèvements qui sont opérés ne sont pas suivis de demandes de rançon. Et c'est d'ailleurs un des indicateurs pour dire que ce sont des enlèvements qui sont opérés par les organisations extrémistes violentes parce qu'il n'y a pas souvent de demandes de rançon qui suivent. Par contre, dans les localités où il y a des demandes de rançon, cela est attribué principalement à des groupes de bandits qui ciblent certaines communautés, notamment les Peuls, qui sont les plus ciblés par ce type d'enlèvement suivi de demandes de rançon, mais aussi certaines personnes considérées comme ayant une fortune, donc des personnes fortunées dans ces localités qui ne sont pas forcément des Peuls et dont les informations concourent à montrer que c'est des personnes qui disposent quand même d'une surface financière importante. Et donc, ces personnes sont enlevées et les demandes de rançon sont donc exigées auprès donc des familles de ces personnes-là. Alors, ceci nous amène donc à formuler quelques recommandations, bien entendu, puisque il est question aussi de voir comment cette situation peut être réglée. Et donc, à travers les résultats, nous nous sommes dit qu'il est important aussi de faire des recommandations pour endiguer un peu le phénomène qui prend de l'ampleur grâce donc à cette présence des organisations extrémistes violentes. Et un des premiers points donc de recommandation, c'est d'élaborer un programme efficace de protection des cibles privilégiées des enlèvements. Tout à l'heure, je disais que il y a par exemple des autorités qui sont identifiées, mais il y a aussi les jeunes qui sont ciblés, soit de manière, disons, forcée en termes de recrutement, mais on a aussi des personnes qui sont considérées comme des personnes proches de l'État qui sont également ciblées. Donc, il est important donc d'élaborer des programmes efficaces pour protéger ces personnes-là afin qu'elles ne soient pas forcément exposées à ces groupes extrémistes violents qui enlèvent donc ces personnes à des buts différents ou à des buts d'information, de collecte d'informations ou d'intimidation. Il faut également envisager des programmes d'amnistie parce qu'il y a quand même des jeunes parfois qui sont recrutés de manière forcée, qui ne rejoignent pas de manière volontaire ces groupes-là. Et nous pensons quand même que ces personnes, entre guillemets, pourraient bénéficier donc d'une certaine clémence de la part donc des autorités. Il y a beaucoup d'ailleurs dont les autorités ont mis la main sur eux et donc qui sont actuellement en prison et qui nécessite quand même un regard de clémence que l'État pourrait donc avoir vis-à-vis de ces personnes-là. Il est aussi important, de notre point de vue, de
You have a couple of more
consolider
minutes, please.
OK. Il est important aussi de consolider les infrastructures locales afin donc de renforcer la résilience des communautés. C'est extrêmement important. Les localités où ces enlèvements sévissent, c'est des localités qui n'ont pas forcément les infrastructures qu'il faut. La présentation de Mme Koulibaly l'a démontré tout à l'heure. C'est des endroits qui ne sont pas forcément pourvus de services publics. C'est des communautés qui sont presque délaissées. Et je pense qu'il est aussi important de renforcer donc les infrastructures dans ces localités-là. Mais il faut également intégrer les enlèvements dans les mécanismes d'alerte précoce parce que les populations ont commencé par développer une certaine expérience donc de la présence des groupes extrémistes violents et dès que des enlèvements commencent pas à être enregistrés dans ces localités, cela montre quand même qu'il y a des signes de présence de ces groupes extrémistes violents et ça peut constituer donc des signes d'alerte précoce pour, disons, identifier une menace potentielle dans ces communautés-là. Et il est aussi important de reconstruire les structures de coopération internationale entre les pays voisins. Et comme vous le savez, le Bénin n'est pas forcément en de bonne posture avec ses voisins du Sahel et cela contribue beaucoup à fragiliser les mécanismes de lutte qui sont mis en place. Merci beaucoup, j'en ai fini.
We have another. You need to wrap up. Merci. Now, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Moses. Sorry for coming in there at the last minutes. We only have probably another 25 minutes for interaction with our distinguished audience. But thank you very much. That was quite interesting. And so now what I'm going to do is we have another probably another 25 minutes. Yeah. By the way, there is a poll which has been lodged on your screen. Please find the time to fill it up. And it's quite important to the ISS and to, yeah, so that they can understand quite a number of things. So please, if you can find the time to fill it up, we will be quite grateful. Thanks a lot. And so now what we're going to do in the next stage, it will be a Q&A. So I'll open the floor for a conversation. If you have a comment, that will be fine. If you have a question, unfortunately, we have lost one of our panelists. Professor Leila had to leave, and she sent a note that unfortunately she will no longer be part of our social life. But I think we have all the other panelists. So we can now go directly into questions and comments, observations about what we've heard from our panelists, and then we'll allow our panelists to respond to the issues. Thank you once again to all our panelists, to His Excellency, Professor Leila Ben Emo, who had to leave, Dr. Onwuka, and of course, Nantene, herself, Flora, and Christian, and of course, Aziz, for these wonderful presentations that you have given us. So the floor is open for comments, observations, and questions.
Hello, sir, Dr. Feyi.
Yes, is that Adebowale?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Can I go ahead? I wanted to raise my hand, but I couldn't see any icon to do that.
Well, the icon must be there. Sometimes they get lost in so many icons. Yeah, but go ahead, please. Go ahead.
All right, sir. Thank you very much, sir. My name's Adebowale Abdurrahman. I work with the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency at the national headquarters with the Directorate of Intelligence. Basically, the NDL is the main organization that deals with narcotics in Nigeria, and we're a major stakeholder within the sub-region. My contribution and my comment, and probably a question I want to ask at the same time, is that we'll probably, I know everyone will agree with me that there is no violence that takes place without an element of, drug abuse or drug use attached to it. And for most of the speakers or the panelists that have spoken, I listened attentively to Ms. Coulibaly, also to Dr. Chris Ani, as well as Flora when they spoke. I think there is need to place more emphasis on the movement of drugs within the sub-region. And why I'm saying this is that we find out that, from most of the cases that we've handled at the NDLA in Nigeria, and also with what we have seen with neighboring countries in Ghana, in Togo, and in Benin, we found out that most of these drugs that either come into the region or that is being moved domestically within the countries, these countries are moving towards the areas where there is violence, where you are having issues and cases of, terrorism being taking place, kidnapping being taking place, and banditry being taking place. One other thing that I probably want to mention is that I wouldn't know if there is a special program that maybe the ECOWAS has that focuses on how to nip some of these things in the bud that has to do with movement of drugs within the sub-region. Recently, there was a case of a ton of cocaine that was seized in a border town between Senegal and Mali. And the same thing is happening in Nigeria. In recent past, what we've seen is that most of these synthetic drugs, that's opioids, tramadol in particular, that moves or circulate within Nigeria, are moving from the states in Nigeria where they are being sourced, that is where these opioids come in, inbound into Nigeria. They are moving towards states where we have violence, kidnapping, and act of banditry. And like I said earlier, there is no violence that will take place. I mean, you wouldn't have someone in his right senses walking into a village, setting the village ablaze, and killing as many as 100 or 200 people at a go. It takes somebody that is, I mean, that is completely out of his or her mind that does that. And we have seen, I mean, examples of suicide bombers when we were having these cases in Nigeria.
Are you able to limit your commentary or question so that?
All right, let me just round it up with a question that what is I mean, what are organizations like the GTOP, ISS, and ECOWAS, what are they doing towards the movement of drugs within the sub-region? What programs do they have? And how are they partnering with law enforcement agencies within this region to carry out these functions? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Abdul Rahman. I check your chat box. I sent you a message as well. Yeah. Okay. Maybe our panelists are taking down notes. Abdul Rahman Adebowole has asked a question, so probably one of our panelists will want to respond to it at some point in time. You have the floor. I'm not seeing any hands, but if you want to make a contribution, you want to ask a question, to make a comment, please feel free to do so.
Okay, can I say something?
Please, Cooper, please go ahead.
Yes. Okay, thank you so much, Dr.
Where are you listening from? Please tell us.
I am speaking from Abuja,
okay.
From the Secretariat of the West African Civil Society Forum.
Okay.
Yes, my concern, or it's not really a concern, it's just that perhaps the scope of this webinar may not really cover that, but I am interested in learning more about not just how the different conflict systems across the regions connect with violent extremism and to some extent even elements of criminality. But I'm interested in knowing what is being done by different stakeholders, especially ECOWAS and then the relevant agencies of the member states and even partners, so that we're able to begin to, think in a forward manner, being able to solve this issue. And my request, perhaps to ISS and to ECOWAS and to partners, is really to, continue this trend. This is a very excellent opportunity to learn about how, complex the issue is. And I think we would like to learn more about also the solutions that have been crafted towards addressing this issue. If perhaps one of the panelists could, touch on that in their responses, I would be very, very glad. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I saw a hand from, I wanted to take 3 questions here. Minas. After Minas, we'll allow the panelists to respond, and then we'll go for another change of questions. So, Kopap, thank you very much, speaking from Abuja. Minas, you're on. Minas Sumela, please, you're on. Minas, can you hear me? Please unmute. You are still muted.
Oui, je vous entends maintenant. Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Je vais ouvrir aussi.
Oui, monsieur.
Vous m'entendez?
Right. I can hear you very well.
OK. Merci beaucoup. Merci à tous les intervenants. J'ai suivi avec grand enthousiasme les exposés des panélistes. Ma question ou bien le constat que j'ai eu à faire, c'est que l'extrémisme violent tire sa source principale à partir des problèmes sociaux. Et lorsque nous comparons les réponses que nous sommes en train de constater de part et d'autre dans les pays fortement touchés, c'est qu'il y a une réponse militaire que des réponses sociales. Qu'en est-il du volet social qui est la base des problèmes de l'extrémisme? Voilà, quels sont les mécanismes que la CEDEAO et les autres institutions sont en train de promouvoir à cet effet? Voilà ma question.
Thank you very much. And well, most of the questions seem well, the three questions and comments seem to have the same type of flagrants. So I'll go over now to the panelists if they can shed some light before we take some more questions. I'll go over to the panelists to answer some of the issues and questions that has been raised. What is basically ECOWAS, the ISS, GI talk, or people doing to resolve some of these issues that we've been hearing? Who wants to have a go?
If you allow, I can start.
Yes, Madam Nantani, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Feyi. Okay, I think the four questions that were raised kind of all touch on ECOWAS, right? Yeah. And that's why I would like to start and allow colleagues maybe to jump in and add some flesh to the analysis. So the first thing, I will take it from what Dr. Aziz said in his presentation as recommendation that we need to track the happenings related to kidnapping in the region. And I wanted to just, tell him that we have a lot of data because we have two indicators that are allowing us to do the tracking of such data. We are tracking gangs violence, and under gangs violence, those gangs operations, we get data. And also the indicator called violence extrajudicial. So we have the possibility to track, and also based on the mapping of actors who perpetrate those the acts. I'm talking of kidnapping. We could know whether it happened in the framework of terrorism and violent extremism, or whether it was just a criminal, activity that was perpetrated for business. So it is being tracked. The second one was whether we have a mechanism to track drug abuse, drug trade. Of course, is one of the 10 indicators that we have under crime and criminality. I said about, I spoke about the 10, the three sub-pillars that we had, the one being gender-based sexual violence, and the second one, personal safety, which takes into account the kidnapping issue, and also transnational organized crime. And trafficking in drugs is one of the major ones. And we don't only track drug seizures, and also movements of issues related to the business, but we also track incidents of drug abuse. And because this is the impact that we could put on the table to show that it is important for ECOWAS decision makers to handle the issue of drug trafficking. So because early warning focuses more on the impact of all those problems on human security globally. So this is why the focus is mainly on not only the trends in terms of drug trade and drug trade in the region, but it's also on drug abuse. And of course, the NDLA partner who just spoke, I am very often on your on your platform, and I am very interested, and I met some of your colleagues, and you have a very insightful let's say webpage where it's possible to get a lot of information on progress being made by the Nigerian NDLA when it comes to fighting drug trade and abuse in the country. And in addition to what the Early Warning Directorate is doing, we have the department in charge of human development and social affairs, which has developed a program since 2014 with the support of UNODC, a program called the WENDU program. WENDU is the West African Epidemiology Network on Drug Use in the region. And it works with governments, in all member states, and also law enforcement, agencies in all member states, right, to assess existing data on that, challenges, but also focus on treatment, on innovations to handle the very alarming trend when it comes to drug abuse in the region. So we have those mechanisms in place for the alert side, but also on the response side with the Wendu program. Yes, Kopep, I'm glad to see you online. We have been working together for quite a long time, and I'm glad also that you raised the issue. I mean, not the issue. You're trying to raise the link between conflict systems that we have identified in the region and also current happenings. Just maybe to highlight the fact that this has been of interest to ECOWAS since 2008. We decided to map out, to cluster member states into systems, conflict systems, to see similarities, to see connections, to see dynamics, right, in those clusters. And we have identified 4 conflict systems. And then when we were starting in 2008, we identified the Sahel-Sahara conflict system as the most dynamic one. And there were key recommendations that were in the publication that we did following, investigation, research, that were conducted by various experts in the region before it, the problem erupted in northern Mali. But there were still recommendations, and we saw what happened after 2012. And but the publication is here available with those very strong, recommendations to tackle fundamentalism, radicalism, and other connected issues that were ongoing in the Sahel. The second one is the Senegambia conflict system, which epicenter is between, of course, the Casamance and Guinea-Bissau. We have seen what has been happening, very dynamic epicenter. The third one is the system conflict around the Mano River Union, and we've also a very dynamic epicenter between Sierra Leone and Liberia. We have all seen what has happened, in that region, that sub-region here. And then the fourth one is the Gulf of Guinea conflict system. So we clustered member states along those, systems, and it's still valid, of course, because we saw that when we talk about crossing borders, criminals acting from one member state is being done in those clusters. Right? Currently, the observation is that it is happening in those clusters. Just an example with the Sahel Central, which is a block, we could see that Liptako-Goma triangle, right? Still a vulnerability 15 years, after we have discovered that it is a major hotspot when it comes to conflict system. And Mr. Sumaila, maybe just the last one. Yes, the Early Warning Directorate was set up in 2004. ECOWAS system, which is coordinated by the Early Warning Directorate, was also established the same year to track happenings related to human security in order to help ECOWAS reach what we call the ECOWAS of the people. We tried, through the data that we gather, situations that we monitor, we analyze, and response that we provide to decision makers to help get the temperature on how insecurity is affecting every single citizen of the region. And we have been doing it in a way that, the decision maker gets it early enough. But let me tell you the problem. It's not that the mechanism does not exist or the work is not being done, because an evaluation of the system has shown that the problem is not on the alert side, but it is on the response side, because everyone agrees that it is highly political. And secondly, we all know that early warning is not the primary source of information for decision makers when it comes to governments. And because intelligence data is always highly ranked when it comes to taking into account what needs to be done to secure countries. Thank you, Dr. Feyi. I hope it wasn't too long. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So, well, we'll open the floor again we have barely 10 more minutes. And can I appeal to other contributors or questions so that we keep it very, very short, so that I don't have to bring the hammer down. So, any further, there is a question on the chat box. What are these organizations doing? By these organizations, I suppose, talking about the ISS, GITOC, ECOWAS, and the like, doing about the over-militarized counter-terrorism paradigm seen in the fight against violent extremism. But whilst we're there, I mean, I agree with my colleague Adebowale about the issue, the link between drug trafficking and violent extremism. It's a problem. It's a serious problem. We just recently came from Liberia, myself and Christian. What I saw, I've traveled widely in Africa. What we saw, I've never seen it in terms of drug and the Kush epidemic. I've never seen it. And it's a massive problem, which ECOWAS, I'm glad, Nantane, you're on the line, because these are things we have to engage ECOWAS with. But anyway, I leave the floor open for more further questions and contributions. No question, no contributions. We have over 80 participants on the chat box. Are we all very satisfied with what is happening? You know, one of the things I always say, Nantane, and to the other panelists, is that we are very good at analyzing what the situation is on the ground, whether it is drug trafficking, whether it is arms smuggling or trafficking and all of that. But what should we do as a population, government? What are we supposed to be doing concretely? Okay, I see Annette, your hand is up. Can you make it very quickly, please?
Yes, thank you, sir. I just want to mention in terms of what people are doing, because ISS, ECOWAS, they are presenting some of their research findings. Yeah. But when we talk about what is done, it is important to note that military officers are trained in how to counter VEOs, amongst others. Police in Africa are trained, and if not, must be trained on how to deal with the very important aspects of rule of law when they deploy in peace support operations or peacekeeping operations. And I made a comment in the box that it is needed to the lowest common denominator in all government services and departments, that officials understand how important their role is, especially at local level, to make sure that the population is looked after and basic services are provided. And that is a counter mechanism for violent extremist organizations to find food and oil for their activities. Thank you.
And where are you speaking from, please?
Oh, I'm an ISS consultant based in Pretoria.
Okay, thank you very much, Annette. That's my appreciation. I see no hands. Abdul Rahman, you want to have a go again?
Yes, please, Dr. Feyi. Just a quick one. I just want to say that.
Very quickly, please. We only have about 5 more minutes. Very quickly.
Yeah, I think we need to do more. There is more need to, I mean, I really appreciate the fact that you said you just came back from Liberia and you can see the epidemic that Kush has caused. Kush originally is from Sierra Leone, but it has a widespread throughout the whole region. The other thing I want us to start looking at is the exchange of drugs. But since the Arab uprising, this has been going on around the Sahel region. There has been a lot of information we have received of exchange of arms for drugs. And this has to do with the opioids, particularly tramadol. We've started seeing drugs like pregabalin, gabapentin, and carisoprodol as well. I'll leave it here now for some other time. Thank you very much, Dr. Feyi.
Thank you very much, Abdul Rahman. Aziz Mosi, please go ahead. You have my attention. Dr. Aziz, please go ahead. Next will be Mary Dieng.
Alors, je voulais juste apporter quelques réponses. Quelques réponses à certaines questions. Il y a M. Soumaïla qui demandait les réponses sociales. Je pense qu'il y a quand même beaucoup d'efforts qui se font actuellement par les États en appui, bien entendu, avec l'appui, bien entendu, des partenaires financiers, notamment les partenaires multilatéraux qui investissent beaucoup. Il y a plusieurs programmes qui sont mis en œuvre actuellement, en tout cas pour ce qui concerne le nord du Bénin, par exemple, d'accompagnement social, de construction des infrastructures au profit des communautés. L'État également a mis en œuvre quelques programmes d'investissement dans ces localités-là. pour, disons, désenclaver ces régions. Il y a des projets de construction de routes qui sont en cours également pour désenclaver beaucoup de localités dans ces régions, et les partenaires aussi accompagnent à travers des mesures sociales, notamment dans le secteur de la santé, dans le secteur de l'éducation. Il y a également des initiatives pour la promotion de l'emploi des jeunes dans ces localités. Je pense quand même que les réponses sociales ne sont pas, même si c'est venu en retard par rapport aux interventions militaires, il y a quand même de plus en plus d'efforts qui sont constatés aujourd'hui dans ces pays-là et qui permettent quand même de développer ou de désenclaver ces régions-là. Alors, il y a également une question qui demandait le lien entre l'identité et ces groupes-là. Je me permets donc de répondre un peu à cette question pour dire que effectivement, la question identitaire joue beaucoup, surtout dans les questions d'enlèvement, notamment dans les communautés. Ce que nous avons constaté, par exemple, dans le nord du Bénin, pour ce qui est des enlèvements, il y a des communautés spécifiques qui sont les plus exposées, notamment c'est les Peuls. Les Peuls qui sont exposés donc à ces types d'enlèvements. Mais c'est aussi des enlèvements qui sont opérés dans des régions fortement islamisées. Donc, je pense quand même qu'il y a des liens qu'on peut identifier dans ces régions. Pourquoi les Peuls? Parce que les Peuls sont généralement, disons, en marge des communautés, vivent dans des zones un peu reculées où ils n'ont pas forcément une protection sécuritaire de l'État, donc sont isolés et sont facilement atteignables par ces groupes-là qui sévissent donc dans les zones où l'État n'existe pas forcément, et ce sont les peuples qui sont généralement dans ces localités-là. Mais également, il y a ces proximités linguistiques qui favorisent la communication. Par exemple, on a vu les enlèvements qui concernent, par exemple, qui sont suivis de demandes de rançon. Les Peuls sont également les plus exposés parce que les ravisseurs ont besoin de communiquer. La preuve, c'est que quand ils enlèvent ces personnes, ils laissent toujours un numéro de téléphone pour que les parents de la victime puissent appeler et qu'ils puissent discuter donc du montant de la rançon. Et quand il n'y a pas cette communication, cette facilité de communication, généralement, ça ne passe pas. OK, donc c'est un peu les deux éléments de réponse que je voulais apporter pour montrer quand même qu'on peut trouver des liens entre les identités et ces actes qui sont enregistrés. Merci.
Okay, thank you very much, Aziz. Finally, I think we'll take just one more question contribution from Mary Dieng. Mary, you have the floor. You're the last participant. Mary, are you there?
Bonjour à tous, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Yes, Mary, where are you speaking from? We can hear you loud and I can hear you loud and clear.
Je m'appelle Méridien. Je suis sénégalaise et je suis doctorante à l'Université Gaston Berger de Saint-Louis. Et j'écris sur la lutte contre la criminalité transnationale dans l'espace CEDEAO de 2000 à nos jours, les programmes de lutte en question. C'est ça le sujet de ma thèse.
Go ahead, we can hear you.
OK. J'avais une question concernant la CEDEAO, l'interconnexion entre entre la résolution des conflits et la lutte contre la criminalité transnationale organisée. Si nous analysons l'interconnexion qui existe entre les conflits, les zones de conflit et l'expansion de la criminalité organisée, on constate de plus souvent que c'est les armes issues des trafics qui militarisent des conflits. Donc, est-ce qu'on ne peut pas dire que la CEDEAO, dans ses politiques sécuritaires, des fois, elle ne met pas plus l'accent dans la résolution des conflits jusqu'à oublier le soubassement même de l'origine de ces conflits-là, qui est le trafic d'armes? Est-ce qu'on ne peut pas lutter contre le trafic d'armes en amont, ce qui permettrait d'amoindrir l'exacerbation des conflits dans la région ouest africaine? Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, this webinar has gone over a couple of minutes, maybe three minutes or so. And I have just been sent a note that we have now finished. But my thanks to Mary Dieng from Senegal. And my thanks to all the panelists, Dr. Onwuka, Professor Leila Ben Amo Matthews, Madam Nantony, Flora, and of course, Christian and Aziz Morsi. My undiluted thanks and appreciation for this wonderful seminar. We could go on and on and on and on and on. Yeah. And I think in the chat box, probably we can exchange emails and contacts for most of these things, particularly Madam Nantony. I would love dearly to have you ask Christian for your contact. There are a few follow-up questions which personally I have and which we don't have, we completely run out of time. But I have follow-up questions for yourself, and including Dr. Aziz Morsi. I have a few questions for you, but I'll do that in our private moments and private time. So thank you very much to all of you, our panelists, to ECOWAS, to the ISS, to GI Talk, and to all our colleagues who joined us from around the world. Wherever you are, we say thank you very, very much for joining us in this important conversation. It will never finish. And I think for me, the important thing is finding answers to some of these very, very hot topics. And I always say we can talk a lot about trafficking, we can talk a lot about all of these issues. But the question we have to ask, and that was the question Madam Nantony asked, are our policy chiefs, are they listening? What can be done concretely? Because at the end of the day, we write all this wonderful research. How many people actually read them? So what are we doing concretely on the ground? So those are important questions, but we don't have a lot of time now to dilate them. We've come to the end of this conversation. And again, my thanks to everyone who took part in this very, very useful discussion. Thank you very much, and we are bringing a close to this seminar. Thanks a lot.